So nearly 2 decades ago, I bought a book that would change my personal and professional life. This book would help me get promoted. It would help me worry less, and it would help me hit my big, hairy, audacious goals. The book is by David Allen and is called Getting Things Done: The Art of Stress-Free Productivity, which you might have heard of the GTD method. In this interview, I got to interview David Allen himself. We spoke about the aha moments to get you started, the challenges with the 2-minute rules, and how productivity is all about the agreements we make or break with ourselves. I hope you enjoy. David, welcome. It is so great to have you here.
Thanks, Kate. My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
I want to first start off with a brief introduction. I don't think you need any introducing, but I wanted to just start the introduction off with a story. So it was 20 years ago, and I had just graduated from college, and I had my first job on Wall Street, and I wanted to get ahead. Again, I was like eager beaver. I wanted to get ahead. So I walked to a bookstore, well before Amazon days. It was, for those of you who are familiar with New York, it's the Barnes & Nobles that was on 5th Avenue and 16th Street, I believe, on the southeast corner, and brought out some cash and bought Getting Things Done. And I said to myself, this is the book that is going to help me get a leg up, grow my career. And I bought that book. And ever since then, I've reread it every year. I've gone on to teach others how to use it. I've gone on to adapt it to fit my own workflow. But I really just want to thank you, because your book has had such a profound impact on my life. And I speak on behalf of, the 260 people here. I know many of them would echo that sentiment. And it really is one of those books. I always joke, it's like cheating. It's like, it's not fair that some people read it and other people don't. And so, before I formally introduce you as the best-selling author of the iconic and time-tested Getting Things Done methodology, which has been translated in 28 languages, has sold millions of copies, has sprung an entire industry, an entire meme. It's part of our vocabulary. It's a must-read for knowledge workers. So with that, thank you again, David.
What can I say? I've been blessed in my life to actually have come across something. I didn't make GTD up, by the way. I uncovered it and just objectified it. But it's not anything new. So, I had the good fortune, I guess, to recognize something without many preconditions about. I've never had any formal or traditional education in time management, psychology, or business. This was all street smart, both for myself to begin with, and then for all the people that I consulted, coached, and worked with over the years. So yeah, so I'm the one who's blessed to have come across this, and then to have somehow been able to make a career out of it.
That's incredible. And so you have uncovered something that was already there. If you could take us back. And now you've seen, we have the benefit of hindsight of what GTD has turned into and become. But if you think about the first strand of an idea or the first strand of an insight into the philosophy or the method, maybe it was when you were a young child, or maybe it was as you were trying to, apply for college. Can you look back and see, that was the moment where I saw this opening, or I saw this thread?
No, if I look back in retrospect, the one thing, and I certainly wasn't conscious of this at the time, but over all the years, I've always been fascinated by models. What are the invisible models that we can learn that if you apply the model, it affects the visible world that you're in? And so, how we think, the process that we use, how that affects performance out here. I've always been sort of fascinated by models. So as part of my DNA, I guess I was always fascinated by that stuff. But in terms of more specific about GTD. I suppose an initial experience was in my 20s when I started to do personal growth, work, self-development trainings. This is Berkeley in the 60s and 70s. So, I took a lot of personal growth stuff, meditation, whatever. And, insight seminars, because got very involved with, one of the core elements of that, it wasn't just in that program, but there in lots of programs, is about agreements. What happens when you keep agreements? What happens when you break agreements? And there was, it's sort of life 101 stuff. It's like, okay, here's something you never really were probably taught, but then I was taught that. It's like, okay, when you keep an agreement, it increases your self-confidence, increases self-worth, and you feel better, it energizes you. When you break an agreement, it automatically disintegrates trust. That's an automatic price you pay. If I break an agreement with you, Khe, it automatically disintegrates the trust. There are people I love dearly, but I wouldn't trust for that I could spit to have them show up when they tell me they're going to show up. Right. So you break an agreement with me, then there's a lack of the trust level between us goes down. But more importantly, if I break an agreement with myself, the lack of self-trust goes down. And so, what most people lack, that little survey you did, most people lack is the self-confidence.
Yes.
Most people, that's the when I saw the results of that survey, I said, well, you just don't trust yourself.
And so
why do people not trust themselves? They made a whole lot of agreements with themselves they haven't kept.
Got it. And to lean into the language of agreements, the agreements can be presumably micro, extremely small ones, such as I'm going to brush my teeth this morning, to extremely large ones where I'm going to save enough money for a down payment.
Or how about fulfill my purpose on the planet?
Okay. Yes. And so this insight on agreements and how did that evolve? So you had this insight, we have these agreements, we break them,
I sort of caught that and had some experience with that, but then it really started to become operational more when I ran across a consultant as I started my own little consulting practice. Sort of after all my jobs, I said, consultant or flake, let me be a consultant. So I started doing that. At the time, I'd also had a lot of experience, or a good bit of significant experience for myself in the martial arts, meditation, spiritual practices, where having a clear head was important. And I realized how strategically valuable it was to be clear, in your head. If you're attacked by 4 people in a dark alley, you don't want to have your head distracted by a lot of other stuff. Right? You need to be there and there and there, and you need to be present. You need to be clear. All the mindfulness folks are talking about being present, focused on your breathing. I learned that 50 years ago when I got a black belt in karate. Right. So that was also a piece of this. And then when I started my own consulting practice, life got more complex, got busier. And I said, wait a minute, how do I keep clear? Because I was getting distracted or whatever. And then in my consulting practice, I ran across a great guy who became a mentor for me that taught me some of the core, 3 or 4 of the core elements of GTD, a guy named Dean Acheson, not the famous one, but a consultant. He's still a friend of mine.
Wow.
And I hung out with him because he'd spent many years doing consulting and organizational change and executive consulting. And he had discovered these techniques of why executives were hung up making decisions. And a lot of times it was simply because they had a lot of barnacles in their organization and in their brain because of stuff that was not clear, that hadn't been captured, hadn't been next actioned, in terms of things that they had commitments about. So Dean taught me about the whole idea of capturing everything on your mind and deciding next actions on all of those, which he'd uncovered out of frustration with executives that had trouble making decisions.
Wow.
So he just uncovered that process, and then it wound up being so powerful that became an initial part of a whole organizational change initiative, was actually implementing that process for all the individuals in the organization. So it cleared the deck, got rid of a lot of old business, surfaced everything, got communication going to clear the decks. And that was very powerful. And so just those simple little techniques clarified tons of issues, from a consulting and organizational standpoint. So those became sort of the core of a methodology that then over the next few years I began to formulate, whatever, a guy, big, guy in the big corporation and head of HR saw what I was doing and said, gee, David, I need those same kind of results that you're getting with your consulting clients about more control, more focus, more space to think about meaningful stuff, all that good stuff. He said, we need to, in our whole organization, can you design some training or some sort of a process around this that we can communicate to a lot of people instead of one-on-one?
Yeah.
So I did spend a couple of months and designed a training, and we did a pilot program for 1,000 executives and managers with what at that time was my methodology. And it hit a nerve. This was Lockheed, 1983, 84. And that you suddenly thrust me into the corporate training world. God, if you'd told me as an American intellectual history major in Berkeley in 68 that I'd be in the corporate training world, I'd go, what are you smoking? Come on. Yeah, really? But it turned out that was the audience that was the hungriest for this, and also the audience that was willing to allocate resources to make it happen. So long story short, from the early 80s on, hundreds of thousands of people going through trainings that I designed and implemented, mostly in the US, though some international at that point. And my consulting turned into, to a large degree, we didn't call it coaching back then, but it was one-on-one, essentially coaching with senior people who either took a seminar of mine or read, or well, I didn't have the book at that time, but heard about me and said, can you come to my desk because I need this personally? And so that then led me into thousands of hours, quite literally. I spent one-on-one with some of the busiest and brightest people you'd ever meet on the planet, actually having them implement this. And that, boy, did that really refine and improve this method and this model. So that's a very long story, as short as I could make it.
I love that. I love the interdisciplinary nature of it, where you're combining, an American history major from Berkeley, and combining practices from mindfulness and elements from the self-improvement and personal development world to really kind of put this all together. I wanted to go back. So you're sitting with these executives, and you're walking them through the method in a very personalized and intimate way. What are one or two kind of aha moments when they come in confused or without a system, but what are one or two aha moments where something just flips and they see the benefit, the future benefit that GTD can offer them?
There are myriads of those. Probably the most common is once I have them do a total mind sweep, as we call it. They empty everything out of their head. They gather together everything in their office that represents stuff that are incomplete. They pile it all in their in basket. They write everything down that's on their mind. That's transformational for many of them. They go, oh my God. They never experienced both the grief and the relief that produces.
Yeah, the famous line, like water.
So, well,
or the first
start of getting that's a first step in getting there, is getting stuff off your mind. So it doesn't crawl back up into your mind, and that's where step 2 and 3 come in, and 4. So that was a lot. There were a lot of major ahas. Just that. Just to write more. Anybody listening or watching this, if you haven't implemented GTD to begin with, if you just write a few more things down that are on your mind. I need lemons. I need a life. We need to decide to get divorced or not. Just any of that stuff that's spinning around in there. Just write it down and watch how much externalizing your thinking helps a ton. Just they're only, the cognitive scientists have only in the last, I don't know, few decades, and certainly in the last decade, started to recognize the value of externalizing your thinking. And so, the mind is a really crappy office. And so, that there's an aha for some people. By the way, whether they stick with it or not is another question. But they get it. That's a big, And the second big aha is to take one of those things they got out of their head. Wow, should we adopt? I need to write that down, right? Pick it up and say, well, what's the next action on that? What would you need to do to move the needle on that, to get more clarity or whatever? Oh my God. Well, I think I ought to wait before that. I think I ought to, what I really need to do is, And so just training them in that cognitive muscle to train about thinking about how do I truly operationalize things that are on my mind by coming up with the next action decision is transformational.
Yeah.
For many of them, they get that. And for some of them, it's just the 2-minute rule was transformational.
Yes.
The 2-minute rule, once they figured out what the next step was, well, how fast would that, how long would it take you to actually do that thing? Ooh, I could send them an email right now. Well, do it. And for some of them, that was worth the price of anything they ever paid me, which is the 2-minute rule. It's like being aha, and that sort of changed. There were some things I was sort of repurposing an essay, actually later yesterday, day before, where I was writing about what are the things. A lot of things in GTD take you a while to really integrate and become habitual with you. But there were at least 3 or 4 things that immediately a whole lot of executives caught. They didn't catch all 3 or 4 of these, but a lot of them caught them. One was write stuff down. Another one was next action decision making.
Yeah.
And another one was the 2-minute rule. And another one was the waiting for list.
Yes.
Just going, wait a minute, what are all the things I'm waiting on to come back from somebody else out there? Because they, most of them, have delegated a lot of stuff, or think they have, but they haven't kept track of all that. And then what spins around in there is this ambient anxiety about all this. Is it all this stuff coming back to me that should be coming back to me?
Oh,
so the waiting for list and an agenda list. Let me keep track of all the stuff. Oh, I need to talk to Jose about that. Well, when are you going to talk to you? Need to send an email? No, I need to bring that up with him when we have a one-on-one. Great.
Yes.
Great. An agenda list. How about agenda for Jose? So these, surprising to me, these things are so basic and so simple and so common sense. And, these are not things people do automatically.
Yeah. No.
They can become conscious of them, but they're not unconsciously conscious yet. It's not automatic.
Yeah.
They still have to learn to do that. They still have to focus on this process. But the initial aha, those are some of the basic ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And 20 years later, I still need to remind myself of the next actions. We have on our team after meetings and different track shared documents, we always kind of close out the document with what's the next action, right? Or else we just commented on a document for a week without taking any precise steps on where we're what was the purpose of this document. I wanted to ask, because you brought up the 2-minute rule, which in some of the productivity, the more nerdy productivity circles is one that causes a lot of debate. And the 2-minute rule debate that often comes up is, in this day and age with 10 different inboxes, Twitter DMs, LinkedIn messages, email, Slack, WhatsApp, Telegram, the list can go on and on and on. We could spend the entire day doing 2-minute tasks.
Unless you know what you're doing.
And so how would you say more? So how do you kind of navigate the kind of...
Well, anything you consider an important in tray for you or an incoming for you, you consider it important, you're getting it. If you don't consider it important, forget it or don't pay any attention to that. But you need to recognize what are the things that are coming across those streams that you actually do need to do something about and have an internal commitment to do something about. So what are you going to do? Ignore them? No. Well, what are you going to, what? I don't have a backlog of 2-minute things. They're done. Right? Anything that I consider important for me to take a look at and pay attention to, it's just done. So yeah, most people misunderstand GTD because they don't engage with it. They don't implement it. And intellectually they go, oh, well, that means da. Well,
but to go a little deeper there, if you have, let's say, like I'll take 3 inboxes: my email inbox, my Slack inbox, and my text message inbox. In each of those inboxes, there are a variety, there will be a handful of important actions. So my mom might be texting me. In my Slack channel, there's, one of my colleagues needs a turnaround on something. And then in my email inbox, a client needs, me to sign has a question on a contract. Those 2-minute tasks are buried inside a quicksand of tasks that are not important. And so the triaging element of it becomes challenging.
Well, so when do you want to walk through the forest and then decide to hop into the quicksand? I mean, come on, how long is it? Okay, come on, honestly, how long would it take you to scan all of your channels?
Yeah.
And find out what's a 2-minute action in there? Tell me that. 2 hours, 2 days, 2 minutes, 25 minutes, what?
10 minutes?
Great.
5 minutes?
And how about the other 8 hours of your day? What the hell are you doing? So why are you exploding that ambiguity into your whole day? It's not. So what? So you take an hour in the morning. I coach a lot of executives that then take the first hour in the morning and they never allow any meetings, because that's what they do, to go through all their channels, clean up all their stuff, organize what they need to, so that they're clear enough to then deal with all the surprises that are going to show up, walk into their door the rest of the day. So tell me the issue.
Yeah. No, I think what I'm hearing is that there aren't the clear boundaries on when you're going to engage, when you choose to engage with those. And I think, I'll call a spade a spade.
Oh, no, wait. What I'm not suggesting is that you set aside an hour a day, a specific hour, to do all that. I just do them when I feel like doing them. But sometimes I sit down and take 5 minutes or 6 minutes and clean up whatever channel is coming in. And then I go do other work. Because I just, that was cool. That's fine. I handled any, fires that were burning, or, whatever. And then I go back to do other stuff. I'm just saying, total time that you spend, scanning it. What you don't want to do, and mental ecology, what you don't want to do is rethink stuff that you're seeing in there. And a lot of people are just scanning that stuff for emergency. I do that. I do that too. I look for quick things, fun things, easy cat videos or whatever. I'll do that just as a way to break the cycle in my day. But so what? In terms of, if you take total time that it takes you to scan appropriately the appropriate channels that you've allowed to come into your life and agreed with yourself have potentially meaningful stuff, is not that much.
What about the expectation on the other end? Because sometimes it's unspoken, where a client
come on, then that's where, hey, can we clear our protocols of our team? Hey guys, what channels are we using in our team here? And can we agree on roughly anyway how often people ought to be looking at this stuff and responding back to that? Because a lot of people say, I don't even look at any of that stuff except once a day. If you need me any faster than by the end of the day or by the weekend, give me a call. That's just sort of the practicality of of clarifying and agreeing on your protocols with the people that you engage with. I'm not saying that's easy, by the way, because especially if you're in a larger organization and more complexity is going on. Understood, but that's still the issue.
Yeah, and I love, in our company we have a document called How We Work, which lists all the norms on responding time and weekend expectations, and do you check email while you're on vacation? So we've definitely gone the lengths, and it's an extensive document where we've tried to make all those unspoken norms spoken, so that the ambiguity disappears. Yeah,
and rules are made to be broken. So but you want to create some sort of a template or structure, so that the exceptions become exceptional as opposed to the rule.
Yep, I love that. And so if you go back to the second challenge that folks had on the list, was one of prioritization. And so, they've handled all the incoming tasks and next actions, and they're in there, but now they're still staring down the barrel of, 70 tasks that all seem important. Very common challenge that our community has, challenge that I have as a business owner and leader is, how do I prioritize these different tasks? What advice or what have you seen that works in your hands-on sessions and your customers in the act of prioritizing?
Well, first of all, if it's not a complete inventory, I wouldn't trust any decision.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be driven by latest and loudest, and then feel bad about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if the question is, once I have it all captured, clarified, organized, so I have the total inventory of all the commitments, everything, all the errands I need to run, all the things I need to talk to my spouse about, every single thing, all my projects. Most of people watching this have 30 to 100 of those. If I've looked at all that, if it's all out there and my external brain is now filled with all of my clarified commitments, that's one thing.
Yeah.
If they're not, then I go, do what you feel like doing and hope it works. Because if all that's done and all that's out there, then I go, great. On your review of that, which one of those things, if you move the needle on that, will make the biggest difference to you? It's not that hard. It's not that hard. But if you have an incomplete list,
yeah,
something that might make the biggest difference to you is not on that list.
Yep.
So, people that try to simplify the prioritizing thing without going into that level of game, they just get it wrong.
So to paraphrase, there's the element of, if it's incomplete, why bother prioritizing? Because you don't even have the
No. You're prioritizing. Everybody's prioritizing all the time. You're just prioritizing right now about what to ask me.
Yeah.
Right. You can't stop prioritizing. You're just, anything you do, there's a 93 million things I'm not doing because I'm doing this. I'm taking a nap. I'm having a beer. I'm now dealing with this ugly email I got to respond. Whatever you decide to do, you're making a priority at that point. The whole point is, how comfortable are you that was your choice?
And you mentioned, it ties in with our 10K framework, was once you have the list of items, what is the thing that is going to move the needle? What is that that highest impact, highest leverage 10K work? How do you there's obviously that question itself, but how do you advise people to really drill into, like, where is that thing that really makes the difference and the rest is all noise?
Quiet time. You need to stop thinking. You need to let the archive part of your brain calibrate all that stuff, and then trust your intuitive judgment. Trust your spirit, your heart, your soul, your liver, whatever you trust, to make an intuitive decision at any point about what you need to do. You may look at all that and go, God, that thing would make the biggest difference. But right now I need to take a nap. There's a lot of things I do that are not on any of my lists, because at the moment I think that's probably the best thing I need to do right now so that I can focus on the really important thing. Some of what you consider strategic, the most strategic things, you should not be doing right now because your brain's not fully there. You don't have the energy to handle that email. That's why sometimes I do the most fun, easy things just to get things going. In the morning, I do Word with Friends because it gets my brain, and I do Wordle just simply because it gets my brain churning without any pressure on it.
Yeah.
Once I clean all that up, then okay, now I'm ready to actually do some focused thinking if that's what I feel like doing.
So the opposite of
that's
eating the frog.
That's an individual moment-to-moment choice.
And I think what I hear and is really important to hear is the permission to have quiet. Right. I think, and there's a quote, I can't attribute it, but busyness is the absence of priorities. Right. And so this kind of need to, and I definitely fall victim to this often, where if things are quiet, I can't lean into the quiet and let my brain go, I quickly
Yeah,
actually go to my inventory of things to do and
yeah,
pick
I know.
another one to fill the
No,
space.
I don't. Kay, you probably know this great old quote, which is, "Don't just do something; stand there."
I haven't heard it, but I will use that one. I will use that one much more. I love how you you keep bringing the mindfulness practice, because and this, yeah, I mean, could you say more about this, kind of the role, we hear getting things done and GTD, and we think activity and action and doing and done and listening to you talk, we hear so much room for stillness, so much room for thinking, so much room for contemplation and introspection. How do you know
Yeah.
how
Well, I think it was Stacy. Stacy, somebody I saw scrolling through the chat before we started said, what was her concept of GTD? And she said, energized tranquility.
mm,
That's a great phrase. Never
mm.
heard that quite said that way before, Stacy. Good job. And of course, I remember Carol's comment, and her word was hope. Yeah. I mean, thanks, ladies. Both those are great. Anyway, yeah, to your point. Well, now we know the absolute value. That's why sleeping on things, they've now discovered scientifically, the cognitive science and their research have discovered that if you have a problem and have an intention to solve it, best to sleep on it, because that lets the unconscious part of you bypass the conscious conditioning you have, and then allows it to put things together that you couldn't do consciously. You wake up in the
Wow.
morning with the aha.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have an intention to solve the problem before that works.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole idea of letting the archive brain, there are three parts of your brain. There's, great guy that I met, is a friend now, and wrote a great book called Brain Chains, who's spent years studying all the research in the cognitive science about that. And he's got a big rant about the absolute necessity to give yourself every 90 minutes, you better stop at least for 5 minutes and let yourself recalibrate. If you can take a nap in the afternoon, that's much better than a cup of coffee. And you better be getting 7, 8, 9 hours of sleep a night. Otherwise, you're missing out. Your brain is missing out on the ability to be able to then connect together the complexities that go on in every person's life and their day.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's a lot of validation now to the ability to take a rest, whether you call it meditation, reflection, contemplation time, or whatever. Sometimes I don't do it every night, but I love to at night, once everything is shut down. Dogs have pooped, peed. Even sometimes my wife is already asleep, and I just lay back in my chair and let myself just, oftentimes with a glass of wine for the evening, and I just let myself just say whatever shows up, and I don't put any pressure on having to think about anything. And that time, many times, and of course, I I always have, even when I do that, this little thing,
Mm-hmm.
which is a paper and
Your
pen.
your capture inbox.
Some of the coolest things I've come up with have showed up in those weird little quiet moments at night. And I stuck it in there in the morning. I go, what the heck is that? Because I even forgot I had the thought. But
Mm-hmm.
then I see that thought and go, oh, well, that could be a cool thing to do. And so
Mm-hmm.
much of what I've created in my life actually got created in those sort of random, offline, uh, let things just percolate and then show up as they do. Now, not everybody has, if you got 3 kids and you got 2 jobs and you got, you know, and you got, you know, yada, yada, yada.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, challenging, but necessary.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And so I'm glad you showed us, because one of my questions was what is your tool? There's so many words to describe this tech stack and second brains and so on, but people hands down wanted to know, how do you implement, what tool do you use to implement GTD these days? And
Well,
did you
the
just show it to
critical,
us?
well, first of all, very different from capture and organize. Capture is very different, and most people don't make that distinction, and so
Mhm.
they screw it up. But capture right there. You saw that. This is on my desk.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't even digitally capture. I've got a tool that would do that, but this requires no Wi-Fi, no batteries, and instant thought, instant
The
in
fastest.
with me instant with me everywhere. And then later on, then I need to process this. So 2 notes on there. One of them I handle, one of them I hadn't. So that goes into my in tray. So a physical in tray, the low tech capture to me is that's what I use. And then I'll pick this up when I'm cleaning up my in trays and cleaning up my ends, and I go, okay, what is that? And so if it's an action if it's 2 minutes or less, I just do it. If it's not, then it becomes an action that goes on my action list. Right now, I'm using Office 365. I'm using the to-dos in Microsoft.
Wow.
I used to use a customized program built on Lotus Notes, but just we migrated to Office, and all you need is a list.
Yeah.
So that's how I got digital lists, and it turns out those map to my iPad and my iPhone, so I can see my errands whenever I want to, just on my iPhone.
Yeah.
So we've got transparency to those lists, but they're just simple lists. I just have a project list. I have a list of errands. I have a list of agendas. I have a list of creative writing actions I need to take. I just have the list that
Yes.
context-based list. So I see those things when I might be able to do those things. That's pretty much how I do it. And how do you manage the non-actionable stuff? I mean, that's an infinite amount of things. Where do you keep all that? So we've migrated over. I've got a lot of my stuff in OneNote now that I can keep there. There's great search function there. So anyway, Microsoft's done a pretty good job of migrating a lot of their stuff. The bad news is they've bought so many apps that they're now trying to plug together and make coordinated against all that. So the ones that have worked pretty well, but they could be totally confusing if you don't know what you're doing.
Got it. So if I'm summarizing, it's your capture, which is a little notepad, built into your wallet, physical. You got an inbox on your tray, inbox on your desk where you actually drop the capture notes in. It seems like you have a larger notepad that's part of the clarify step, to clarify and organize step, to kind of put things in the right lists, and then the lists go into.
No, the notepad still capture. It's just
it's
on
still
my
capture.
desk.
Got it.
Yeah, it's just a lot easier if we're talking to you and I suddenly have an idea. I want to, it's always out there.
Yeah.
It's always, because God knows when lightning's going to strike and an idea is going to show up. So those are as ubiquitous as possible. I don't need any clicks. There's no
very
click.
powerful.
As soon as you have to click, especially have to click twice, you're not going to capture. You won't do it.
Yeah.
Too much trouble, especially if you're kind of ADD or ADHD. You won't do it. It's too much trouble. Your brain's already moving faster than that.
Yes. Well, I'm glad you set us up for our last question, which has come from, it was the most asked question when people signed up, which is, what advice do you have for folks with ADHD trying to implement GTD? And you have already suggested one thing that doesn't work well: multiple clicks for capture. But it's something that has, it feels like this conversation wasn't happening in public a decade ago or 2 decades ago about the relationship between different productivity methods and ADHD, and is definitely happening more frequently now. So how have you seen that work, and what advice could you give folks who are neurodivergent?
Well, I'm not a physician. I'm not an expert in that area. I've worked, and some of our coaches have been quite expert in that area. First of all, the nature of that condition ranges hugely. First of all, most people on the planet are ADHD. Simply, not diagnostic so, or not clinically so. So a lot of it depends on that. But we've had a lot of people get off Ritalin once they started to just do GTD itself, just simply because they go, oh my God, a whole lot of that spin was simply because I had it all in my head. That was crazy. As soon as I started to externalize it, I didn't need all this support, to stay clear and stay focused. And believe me, that's not a recommendation to stop that. what Ritalin does or things like that is they speed up the sequential process of your brain. Even though you think that's speed that you're taking, it actually speeds up the sequential part that then slows down the associational part. That's the one that spins. So so that's why, some of those drugs, some of those, substances actually, you sort of slow down by speeding up, strangely. So that's something I only recently understood in the last few years about how that just works chemically and why that works, in that way. But otherwise, I just say start doing this as much as you can, and there's no difference in terms of what I would teaching about it or what I would coach anybody with who thinks they have that syndrome, other than what I just said. I mean, what the process is. Like, we'll get it all down, have some sort of a way to do that. The problem is your impatience with the system. So if you're ADD or ADHD-esque, what you hate trying to sit down and make a list, you feel like you feel like you're in quicksand. You feel like you're slowing down the world in such a way that you just feel really uncomfortable doing that. And so you got to get used to that.
Yeah.
Or just take them little by little, and little by little, you can then you build this in, but that won't happen overnight. You just start to get used to these processes, and and check with people who are good at this.
Yeah. And I think the message of patience, right? I think many people here are looking for a silver bullet for something that is quite complex, right? Life or the human brain. And the silver bullet is, the book. I'll vouch for the book being the closest thing I've personally found to a silver bullet, but still I'm going to go back and tweak the system. Just a few little changes. My waiting on list is not as dialed in as it should be. So kind of make sure like why that's not working for myself. But the patience, I mean, again, long game, playing long games. This is something that I personally have absorbed over, two decades. It kind of blows my mind. My daughter, my 8-year-old, asked me today, she said, "Are you interviewing someone famous?" And I said, "Heck yeah." And she's like, "What is he famous for?" I said, time management and getting things done. And she goes, "Oh." But it is that kind of the muscle memory of just going through the patience and going through the steps and trusting the system. So with that,
Well,
I guess
anybody listening or watching this who maintains a calendar or a diary or an agenda is already doing it. They've already decided look, if your brain could do all this, just throw away your calendar. No, because that's important that I keep some sort of an external track of these things so that I can stay focused when I need to stay focused on the right thing. Well, I'm sorry, but that's kind of a big duh.
Yeah. Yes. Well, David, thank you so much. This has been the largest attendance for anything we've ever put together. So a testament to the incredible work that you've put into this world, the lives of knowledge workers, parents, teenagers, spouses, all of that. Your impact, and as someone who teaches different productivity methods, have seen it firsthand, the impact that your work has had downstream, down organizations and down families. So I know I'm not alone in thanking you for putting all of that into the world, and to thank you for graciously spending 48 minutes of Monday evening with us today. And I'll lastly direct everyone to make sure, if you haven't bought the book, please go buy the book. I still spend a lot of time on on the GTD website, just kind of refining the different methods. And so, yes, just from the bottom of our hearts, thank you, David.
My pleasure, Kay. This was fun. And hopefully good luck to all of you, and just, stay with it. And to your point, Kay, patience. As Emerson said, hallmark of the mature person is patience. So
Yes.
relax, take it easy, step by step. Yay.
Amazing. Well, thank you all. And thank you, David. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks, Team Rad Reads, Marion, Jane, and Matthias.